we are not important. We're 100% not important. Whoever are important is the family, and obviously the fallen soldier himself.
One widow who led us through a yoga exercise, um, and all kinds of songs, which you wouldn't usually expect to hear at a funeral. But I must say that everything was so authentic, and in a way, it was maybe a little bit weird. It felt, out of context, but because it was genuine. It was their way to cope with it. So, even for me, it was emotional.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shtark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, in honor of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, we have a special Megapod divided into 3 parts. First, I'll share a story about someone who I really wanted to interview for this episode, why he said no, and the powerful lesson we can learn from it. Next, we sit down with 2 brothers, both lawyers, one from Ramat Beit Shemesh and one from Petach Tikva, who serve together in the same Miluim unit. They're part of the division of the IDF rabbinate that conducts military funerals. One brother used to serve in the unit that recovers and identifies fallen soldiers. We'll talk about which job he thinks is harder. The other brother was present at the very first funeral on October 8th and has officiated at official state ceremonies as well. And finally, we'll close with a collection of short stories that capture the 2 sides of this emotional week, the pain of loss and the pride of our nation. Most of these stories are from the Shtark Tank archives, but the first one actually comes from a different podcast. It's the story of how a CEO of one of America's biggest brands, who was actually a Ben Torah, who I've known for many years, fell in love with Israel. It's a crazy story, and it moves me every time I hear it. I'm Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shtark Tank. The person I originally wanted to interview for this week's episode is Josh Hexter. Josh would have been an incredible guest. He's a senior executive at a large pharmaceutical company. He has an early morning chavrusa with one of the Jewish world's most famous podcasters, not me, and is deeply involved in chesed and tzedakah. Josh's son, Yakir Hexter, was killed in Gaza on January 8th, 2024. He was 26 years old. I asked Josh if he would be willing to come on and share some of his experiences. This was his response, and I'm quoting from my WhatsApp. Maybe too hard for me, but let me think about it. Thank you for thinking of me. Let me read that again. Maybe too hard for me, but let me think about it. Thank you for thinking of me. That message hit me like a truck. I still remember exactly where I was standing when I read it. There are many bereaved families who find comfort in the public eye, speaking at events, giving interviews. For some, it's a way to process, to heal. You've probably seen them advertised speaking at a local shul or on a podcast feed that you enjoy listening to, and that's wonderful. But there are also families who aren't ready or simply don't want to grieve in front of a microphone or a crowd. Some choose privacy. Some carry a pain so raw that it feels suffocating even to put it into words. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge those families too, to salute them, and to let them know that we're thinking of them, even if we don't hear their voices. On that note, Josh did agree to send a letter, a few words about Yakir, and about why stepping into the public role feels overwhelming right now. I'll do my best to get through it. Josh writes as follows. When asked to speak about my son Yakir, I find myself at a loss. Not because there isn't enough to say, quite the opposite. How does one distill the essence of someone so multifaceted into words that could ever do him justice? Faced with this impossibility, I turn to the voices of others. Among the many things written and said about him, I can only cherry pick small glimpses that reflect who he was. His Shana Bet Ram, Rav Amnon Bazak, described him as Nesich Adam, a prince among men in every sense. Yakir embodied this not just in his physical strength or intellectual gifts, but in the nobility of his soul. Nefesh atzila ve'adina. Shekol hatov sheba'olam nishkaf me'eneha. A noble and gentle spirit from which all the goodness in the world was reflected. His Shana Aleph Ram, Rav Michael Edrei, captured another dimension of his character when he said, Hakshava ata, you are an embodiment of listening. He explained, Hakshava hi anava, ve savranut. Ata lo nivhal lehashiv, makshiv. אחרי שאתה מקשיב, אתה חושב לעומק, ואז מדבר. מדבר בתבונה, מדבר בכישרון. Listening is humility and patience. You didn't rush to respond. You listened, thought deeply, and only then spoke. And when you spoke, it was with wisdom and with skill. Some parents, continues Josh, find strength in publicly sharing their grief and memories, offering chizuk to others through their words. I deeply admire their courage. But for me, the weight of trying to represent someone so complete, so complex, feels overwhelming. In the now famous picture of Yakir and his chavruta David Schwartz, both killed together, they were learning Mishnah Brura. But if Rav Edrei had to associate Yakir with a book, he said it would be Mesilat Yesharim, because above all, Yakir was a person of musar and character refinement. How can I, his father, ever convey that in words? The verse, Haben Yakir li Ephraim, resonates deeply with all who knew him. For our family, it is undeniable. He was our precious son. But as Rabazak noted, for so many others, Yakir was like a beloved son and brother who touched their hearts and souls. I try to find comfort in honoring his memory through action, by striving to embody even a fraction of what Rav Edrei called Nikach ktsat mitikun hamidot shelo, Nikach shtika, ktsat anava, ktsat shikul dat. Let us take a little of his character refinement, a little bit of silence, humility, and a little bit of thoughtfulness. May we all find strength in his memory. Thanks to Josh for sharing that powerful note. Now we move on to our second section, an interview with Avraham and Daniel Colthuf, two brothers, both lawyers, both serving in the reserves, and both chazanim who officiate at military funerals. They give our fallen soldiers their final honors and offer comfort to grieving families in their darkest moments. So with Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut coming up, it's a great honor to have Avraham and Daniel Colthuf joining us on Shtark Tank. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
for
us.
having us.
So let's start with you, Avram, because you're the older brother. Tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up, the age gap, the family you guys grew up in, where you grew up, and then we'll hear from Daniel as well.
Okay, so I'm number 2 out of 6 boys, no sisters. Born in Amsterdam, Holland, raised in Yerushalayim. Grew up in Yerushalayim, Kenali as a baby with another older brother. And the rest were born here in Israel already. I grew up in Yerushalayim, first in Sandria, then in Har Nof. Basically, that's it. Went to Marava. Was the fourth machzor of Marava. Fourth year of Marava. It's actually the 5th year, but fourth machzor. There's a story behind that as well. And after that, went to Yeshiva Gavoa. And after I got married, I enlisted into the army. And actually, nothing to do with the army Rabbanut. And as Miluim, I was asked to volunteer to the Rabbanut. That's how I ended up in the Rabbanut in the army in 1998.
And Daniel, what was life like growing up with 6 boys in the Colthuf house? What type of games were most popular? What type of things were you guys doing?
So I'm number 5 out of 6. So I got beat up quite nicely here and there, but I stood for myself. Some good. Yeah, it was quite hectic. The age difference between the oldest and the youngest, 20 years. So my older brother was almost 20 when our younger was born. So it was quite when the younger ones grew up, the older ones were already out of the house. But we made it fun, and nowadays we're great friends. Actually, since COVID, we have a tradition of going on a bros trip every year. We choose a place. We go only the guys. So it's great, Shem. So I also grew up in Har Nof, Anglo area, and I went also to Marava. And thereafter, I also went to Yeshiva Gavoa. And after I got married, I joined the army. I joined the army immediately as the Rabbanut guy. At the time, immediately after I got married, I was interested in chazanut and cantorial singing. And I joined the Tel Aviv Cantorial Institute, where I studied to be a chazan. where I met Shai Abramson, who is Lieutenant Colonel Shai Abramson, who is the chief cantor of the IDF. He was then quite new in the role, and he said, "Hey, I'm looking for good chazanim to join the army and be a chazan tzvei." And I said, "That's great because I'm really up to joining the real world." I was a Avraham and Daniel back then, but I decided already to leave the coil and thinking about the professional career. But first off, I had to do my military duties. I said that's great. I'm happy to to serve and do whatever I'm talented in. And then I joined. I did my Sadia service as a Chazan Tzvai. And after I actually finished my Sadia service, Shai offered me a position to be his deputy, because he was looking at the time for an officer in the IDF to be able to cover for him whenever he cannot officiate. That's how I ended up being his deputy. Something that for I think 15 or 16 years now.
Wow. So before we get a little deeper into the whole world of chazanim tzvaim, you guys are also both lawyers. So maybe tell us how that came about. Are there other lawyers among the six boys, or just the two of you?
So it's funny because we have a lot of similarities. It seems like it's one cookie cutter that that but was used, but actually out of the six, we were the two who went through these kinds of path. Aram obviously was the first one who he studied Bar Ilan. He can speak about it. I joined much later. And nowadays, I'm a partner in Meitar, which is the largest law firm in Israel, actually. We do corporate law, we do international litigation, international deals. And it's funny because it looks like I actually went in his footsteps, but I actually didn't want to become a lawyer because when I thought about what will be my profession, there were too many lawyers in Israel already. And I said, it's not smart to join this market. So I actually used up a benefit that I was a soldier at the time. So I went to career counseling at Bar Ilan. And after like a long process and many like the sessions with the psychologist and this and that and tests, he said, listen, this is the thing that you'll be most successful in, and don't worry about being the market being flooded with lawyers. If you're gonna be good, you're gonna make a living. And Baruch Hashem, he was right.
I did the same type of career consultation, not through Bar Ilan, but through Machon Hadassah. That's I'm talking about in over 20, almost 30 years ago. And the results were actually interesting. Two things were said. If you're going to go to architecture, it can be interesting, good for you, but law is very suitable for you. So I went for law, and I went to Bar Ilan University as actually after the army. I've been practicing already 22 years. I have my own practice for the past 14 years. I practice real estate, I practice estates, wills, basically some corporate, but not much.
Cool. So yeah, so let's get a little deeper into the whole world of chazanim tzvaim. And Daniel, you started to tell the origin story a little bit. So maybe you could start by defining what is a chazan tzvai, what are their roles and responsibilities, and the trainings that are involved.
Sure. So as being a Chazan Tzvi, during my Sadir, my regular military service, as I said, I was already trained as a Chazan, and I was already, I was recruited to be a Chazan based on that I have already the skill. I mean, it's not like many other military jobs that you learn the job, like, do you have a course or something like that? I was out of basic training, and the next day I was sent with another guy to see how they exactly do a memorial for a fallen soldier. And the day afterwards, I was sent to do one by myself. So not a lot of training involved at the time. Shai was working hard to change that because it was important for him that all Chazanim Tzvahim will be adequately trained, at least, and know how to say correctly the Tehillim and have carried the tune of El Malel Ramim in respectful way, to do it in a way that would respect the fallen soldiers. But a little bit maybe about this Back at the time, we were about 8 or 10 chazanim tzvaim in Sadir, and our job was mainly to do askarot, which would mean the memorial service for a year, the annual, or sometimes it would be a shiva or shloshim. We didn't do any funerals as chazanim sdirim. Usually they're too young for that, um, and funerals it's a whole different profession. And that was you get a schedule at on Sunday. Every day you go to this cemetery, to that cemetery, you get names and of course dates and telling you exactly where you have to be, and that's your responsibility to get there and to be there and to be there on time and to interact with the IDF officials who come, and to interact with the family, conduct the service, and then you go to the next one or you are for the day. And of course, just you get the magnitude of that. As we know, there are around 24,000 Chalalei Malchot Israel through the years, and each one of them, if the family is still around and they want the army to provide them with the Chazan Tzvai to do the memorial, and as well with the minyan, so they can ask through the Sinat Nifgaim, they can ask the army to provide that, and we do that. So basically, you could in the same day you can go to a grave of someone from Milchemet HaShichur. There's still someone who is connected, and once is it's important for them to do the memorial, and you can go then to a shiva one, which is very fresh and different experience completely. And of course, because many of those yard sites are at the same time, sometimes around times like wars, around the June, around the 6 Day War, around October, the Yom Kippur War, and now, of course, October 7th is a big date. So there is a massive Miluim force that can reinforce those dates that are, there are too many Askarot to do. So in order to cover all them, there's about 100 Chazanim Tzvayim in Miluim, maybe more. So on those days, they recruit them all to do Askarot and memorial services. As the deputy chief cantor, I shifted a little bit from this role, and it was mainly covering for the chief cantor, doing whatever he is doing, but whenever he's absent. So he has a lot of responsibilities. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes he has other engagements. So whenever he can do it, he calls me up and I join. So it's mainly state ceremonies, טקסים ממלכתיים. I even once led the state funeral of the late Nasi Navon when Shai wasn't, he was abroad and he missed it. So I did it. So it was mainly, it was less, dealing with bereaved families. It was more doing ceremonies. It was more of a ceremonial role until October 7th, which I'm sure we're going to speak about it.
Right. So
And
Avraham, maybe tell us
Avram,
about how you ended up
yeah,
in this chayal, in this unit as well.
Well, that's actually very new for me because in 1998, when I went for Miluim for the first time, they were looking. The Rabbanut was looking to recruit people to join the Zihui Chalalim, the identification of casualties, fallen soldiers. And I volunteered for that, and I did the course then. It's a course you follow, and you learn the whole methodology of how the army does with dealing with fallen soldiers from the moment they're in the field till the completion of identification and preparation for burial and all the stages. And I did that course back then and was placed in the, let's say, the frontline unit in down south, Pikud Haram, and what's called Yasar Yechidat Zrika. That's the unit that goes out and has to search and collect. And I was in that unit for 25 years. Ended up as a Mefaket Zevet, and that's what I did in previous, let's say, not wars, but there were like war situations like Tzuk like Amutanan, like Ofer Kitzuka. And then came the age of 46, and I had enough. I said, enough is enough. I volunteered for 5 more years because officially you do Milim only till 40. And I said, okay, enough is enough, and now I'm out. And then came up to October 7th. And it was the first time that I was at home. And I wasn't called. I didn't get the Tzav Shmona. I wasn't called. I'm already over 50. So, and I spoke to Danny, and Danny told me they're overwhelmed. I saw the magnitude of what was going on there. And I said, I can't handle that. It was Sunday, Monday after. Says it's something that we've never seen before. And it took a week because the army couldn't enlist back volunteers. The army was, it was a chaos. It was a massive chaos the first week. I said, I'm here. I'm willing to volunteer. It says, well, we got an order from Akka. We are not taking any volunteers. Not this type. Not we. It's impossible. So it took a week till I was enlisted, and then I was placed at the unit which we're both part of. Danny, not as his regular role, but his, let's say, wartime role, and me back as a mitnadev, as a volunteering in Miluim. I signed up for 5 more years to be in the Yechida called Black, which is a very black name. But maybe I will explain a bit how does the army work when it comes to fallen soldiers, to casualties. There's few units all under the scope of treating casualties of war. So you have the frontliners, these are the soldiers who are standing by the front line, and depends on situation, but they are the one who actually see the fallen soldiers first from the field, whether in worst case scenarios they have to do some more extensive work of bringing them back. Sometimes they be brought back by the medical teams or by the unit themselves, and then they handed over to the soldiers at the field. That's what actually was my role until this war. And then they send them back to like it's called a Tachanat Isuf Chalalim. It's like a bit further back from the front line, where they start already the initial process of identification. If it's possible, they take already the fingerprints there, and then Israel is a small country. Officially, the idea was to set up in the north and the south, wherever necessary, a whole center. But since Israel is so small, driving from Gaza area to central of Israel doesn't take less than an hour and a half. So just send them back, the fallen soldiers, to Shura Army Base, in which there's a very brand new, it's a few years old brand new facility. And there they go through several stages, and there are several teams dealing until the completion of identification and preparation for burial. And when the fallen soldier is ready for burial, then comes into play the, let's say, the last, I would say, unit to deal with a soldier until burial, and that's the Black. Black stands for Bitzua Levayot Keva. Doesn't mean Anshe Keva, means Kavua burials. Because in Yom Kippur War was the only time they did it in the history of this country. They had to do a temporary burial versus a permanent burial. They had to do the magnitude was massive. Technology was, in 1973, wasn't even close to what we have now. There are thousands of casualties, and they had, unfortunately, to use the method of temporary burial. Also, the distances were massive. We're talking about the Sinai Peninsula, which was hours and hours drive away. So they had to do temporary burial, and after a year, they did permanent burials. And this unit is in charge of the permanent burials. And there was, for a glimpse of a second after October 7th, not in the army, actually, but with the civilian casualties, maybe would be unavoidable to do temporary burials. But thank God they managed to avoid that and get, even though it took longer, but to get to full identification and get everyone, even though it took weeks, to come to a permanent burial and not to a temporary burial. So since October 16th, because it took a week for me to enlist again, I'm back, but now in the role of officiating funerals and memorials.
So, Daniel, you mentioned that there's a big distinction between the yard sites that could be many, many years in the future slash past to the Levaya, which is this super intense, super fresh experience. And you also alluded to the fact that there needs to be proper training. So can you talk a little bit more about that difference and who is and is not allowed to step into that role of being a chazan at the Levayot at that really, really raw and terrible moment?
Right. So I actually did a few funerals before this war. I remember in Sukitan, I took part in a few. I was also in Miluim, and I took part in a few funerals. But back then, the magnitude was different, and also we had around, I think, 70 or 80 casualties, but it was it was spread on a few weeks at time. So basically everything was very, of course, intense, but it was very organized, and every levaya had, the time to prepare for it. There are in the army a few nagadim, which are non commanding officers who, sorry,
Non-commissioned officers.
non-commissioned officers, right? Who are in charge, actually, the military cheva kadisha, and it was their role, to handle the burial, to prepare to prepare the body for burial, and to actually facilitate the preda, the last farewell of the family can come and bid farewell with the fallen soldier, if there is an opportunity that they can actually see him, if it's possible. So they allow that, but that's their role. And so all the funerals I did before this war, I was only officiating. I came there. It was very, of course, sad, and it's a very emotional and everything. But I had only one aspect, which was more ceremonial, that I had to take care of. I didn't deal with the families themselves. I didn't dealt with the logistic. It was just doing my bit as a chazan. Coming October 8th, actually, because I Motzei Simchat Torah, I called immediately the unit. I said, "Do you need me?" He said, "Come tomorrow morning as early as you can." So I came October 8th. It was Sunday morning. It was chaos in Shua, whatever was going on there, trucks going in, going out, and there were no funerals scheduled yet because everything was just going on. And so I asked, okay, what do we do now? So a guy said, okay, let's take all the chazanim to a room here, and let's do some give you some guidance. So the guy starts to explain to us what you have to do with the preda, and what do you have to do here and there, and how do you exactly handle? And I was like, what is this guy talking about? I mean, this is the kabranim job. What are you talking to us about it? So he said all the kabranim are busy with identification. Nobody is available to do at the actual funeral. So you guys are going to do it. And that was the moment I realized we are in a completely different situation. And that evening, I think there were already six levayot. I think there were seven scheduled, but one was a Nofakim, and there were still terror threats around there. So they actually canceled the Nofakim. They delayed it, deferred it to the next day. But I went to Yerushalayim and did the first funeral, and I understood it's a completely different event that's going on. Usually in regular times in Shua they have a facility, and they have what they call Chadrei Preda, where they can, in a very, I would say, a very clean way, very sensitive way, can bring in the family to do the Preda from the Niftar, and they can, give them all the explanations and everything. But here there was no time, was no you couldn't have everyone coming to Shura, because Shura was very efficient. It was working, but everything was just, it was like a factory. It was like people going in, going out. So we need to do the predot at the cemetery. So we actually came to the cemetery, and we met the family there, and of course with the Tzidei Nifgaim, who did a tremendous job during this war. It's just, I saw that up close. It's just amazing what those the Modi'in from Tzidei, what they did. So together with them, we had to deal with actually to deal with the families and to witness those moments of a family saying goodbye to the loved one. And then you had to it was a mixed role of technical, logistical, emotional, ceremonial, everything together, because it was our job to, for example, to make sure that the way from the car to the burial site is clear, and to make sure that the dig, the kever is big enough. And it was our job to make sure that the nosei aron, the soldiers who carry the coffin, they actually, you have to explain to them exactly how to do it and take charge of it. But all the time also, you have to deal with the family, and you have to deal with your role as handling this whole, and managing the whole funeral, and having people come up and invite the speakers, and then eventually also do your bit as the kelma lerachamim. And it's really a mixture of emotional moments, logistical considerations, and it was a lot. But Baruch Hashem, I think we can say that, looking backwards, I think that the Rabbanut did a tremendous job, and we actually gave every funeral, every family, every fallen soldier had the opportunity to do it in the way they wanted it. And we never said to anyone, you have to cut it short. Or even if we had at the same day, we had, I think the peak day was, I think, Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not sure, but we had over 80 funerals in one day. And in a HaAtzmaut, for example, we had 8 or 9 funerals in the same day. So there's a funeral coming in, and there's still a funeral going on. They did above and beyond to accommodate everyone. It wouldn't, so every funeral, and you should, if you probably saw that every funeral where hundreds and thousands of people came. It was like Am Yisrael. There was no small funeral in this war. There was no. I haven't seen one. So it was very hard. But I think that, Baruch Hashem, we can say that we handled the job. We were able to do that. I mean, we were only a part of it. There was a massive system that was working here, the Nifgaim and whatnot. But Baruch Hashem, I think we managed to give, and we hope we managed to give every fallen soldier the right kavod that they deserve.
Yeah, it was really crazy. The first Levaya I went to, I think it must have been October 10th. There was a soldier from Kibbutz Yavne, and they did the Hespedim in the kibbutz, and the Kfura in the Beit Kfurot was around a 7-minute walk away, so they decided to drive. And the Rabbanut had quickly rented vans because they didn't have enough vehicles, and they couldn't get the van to turn on with the code. It was such a mess that people were scrambling, and they ended up putting their own into the van, failing to get the ignition to start, and then taking him out and then walking him the distance, was a really sad sight to see, but a testament to how people were just scrambling to make it happen, even though it was very, very hard. So, Avram, maybe tell us a little about your initiation and the first Leviat that you experienced, and I'm sure it was an unforgettable experience for you as well.
Oh, yes, it definitely was. As I said, after 25 years of dealing with the soldiers themselves, and it exposed me to a whole different aspect of the emotional aspect. Honestly, not that I'm a cold person, but dealing with fallen soldiers, like people, undertakers, they see it daily. You get used to it. You get used to, I won't obviously not go into details, but you can imagine that people who get killed at war are not always in the nicest shape. But you get used to it. I was in the fields. I did the tough work, the hard work, and I've dealt with it in the past, and you can get used to it. Also, obviously, not in the magnitude of October 7th. That was also people working, serving in Shura, in the system of the identification. I mean, there are about 300-400 soldiers there, all miluim. Everybody's in miluim. There are no, only reservists. There are no young guys doing that job. There's all older people, mostly. It's a tough job, but between you and me, it you're able to get used to it. You can, I would say, you're not emotionless, but you are in a mission. And when you're in a mission, you do the job. Comes the funeral aspect. And the funeral aspect has the emotional aspect. So you can be in a mission and you do the job, but you cannot seclude yourself from what's going on around you. You cannot seclude yourself from the family. You have to be strong. You have to stay strong. And it's definitely a new aspect which I did not have to deal with until then. It's a whole. It's emotionally much harder than dealing with the fallen soldiers themselves, dealing with the families, hearing about the soldiers, dealing as the Preda, the farewell is a very, 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 very tough moment. Doing Kriya for little children, it's a very any time there's little children involved, it breaks your heart. It breaks your heart every single time because we're not emotionless. We see what's going on, we feel what's going on, and yes, we do tear. And it was definitely was a serious. And as I said, nobody, as Donnie said, I mean, no one prepared you for this. Nobody could have prepared you for this. You just go in and and by the way, to the question, how do you get trained? First and foremost, be a mensch, just use your common sense. You have to use a lot of common sense and be a mensch. And you know how to deal. And first of all, and Donnie will say it also, we are not important. We're 100% not important. Whoever are important is the family, and obviously the fallen soldier himself. We are just here there for them, whatever they want, whatever they need, and we are not, as we said, we are not important. We're just playing the role according to their wishes. And if you come with that mindset, then it will work, and you use your common sense. And as Donnie said, we did our best to accommodate everything, every mishigas they had. We did.
Wow. So, I mean, on that note, I'd be curious. Obviously, every family grieves differently and responds differently. And I'm just interested if there are any like interesting, weird, quirky things that people requested or people that did in their levias that were just sort of their personal way of coping with these awful moments.
Of course, without going into personal detail, of course, but you could see different ways to cope with the situation. I mean, I've done levayot of soldiers, so as devnikim, which was one thing. I have done levayot for kibbutznikim, which was another thing. I've done levayot for all kinds of, and there were a few moments where I was stunned. It can be clapping during the spedim, and cheering for the grandfather who stood up to do the sped. One widow who led us through a yoga exercise, um, and all kinds of songs which you wouldn't usually expect to hear at a funeral. But I must say that everything was so authentic, and in a way, it was maybe a little bit weird. It felt, out of context, but because it was genuine. It was their way to cope with it. So, even for me, it was emotional. Of course, there were those levayot who turn into a sort of kumsitz. You mean songs and songs and everyone singing together over and over, and this song and that song. And there were those levayot to, mostly silence and cries and here and there, someone bursting out in some sorrow and grief. So it was really, really different. You really saw Am Yisrael, in its less cynical place. It's something that I'm always saying about this job in the tzava. I'm always saying I had the opportunity to see. Every soldier has his story, and back then when I did the memorials, I used to learn about every soldier that I went to its memorial. You have the Misad HaBitachon website where you have the older story, so I always came prepared. So it was always so interesting to see, and you really see Am Yisrael in the place where nobody cares about politics. Nobody cares. I mean, there was some politics here and there in this Pedim, of course. It was a very hectic year. There were some places where we came, and we actually felt, the anger of people against the system, against the
Even
government,
hostility.
the army. But once they realize we're there for them and to do the job the way they wanted to be done. Usually it diffuses the situation, and we were able to, to give the kavod acharon as it should be. So definitely every family is different. And we saw all of it.
From not
Definitely.
anything?
Yeah, I mean, we have all kind of, as you says, we might call it quirky, but that's definitely their way of life. Levaya was calling out Vurachu when they were lowering the coffin, and there was very loud, groovy music playing in the background, and the family and friends were dancing around. We had all kind of things, but that's their way of, was their way of life, and that's the way they part away from life. So they wanted to spread the love, and then everybody had to hold hands and this kind of things. Or we had a reform funeral, which we didn't really play part in. We were just basically there just to accompany until burial. It was definitely different than what we're used to, but obviously it's the families and their way of doing it. As Donnie said, we were exposed to all ways of a beautiful nation, and all one thing in common. They're all in terrible sorrow. They just lost the loved ones.
Yeah, that they all were people who put their lives aside and went out to defend the Am Yisrael. So
Wow.
basically, they're all one.
Well, so you said before that we're all Am Yisrael and all sort of united by this awful fate. Avram, the first time that we met was in a really dark moment at Ali Moshe's Levaya, and your family and the Zimblis know each other. My wife and your daughter went to school together, and I'm wondering, like, how does that work? Did you coordinate to be there for that day because you knew the family? Who do you call? Who calls you in such a situation?
So the truth is, the day Elimar Hashem Yikam Damo fell, there was a whole group of fallen soldiers. He wasn't the only one. And I was on duty then, because until mid-January, we were all enlisted. We were close to 100 days, bereaved, and then we started doing what they call in good Hebrew, svavim, shifts, meaning we were 1 week on, 2 weeks off. And it happened to be that I was on call that week. And obviously, there were few funerals going out the same day. And when I spoke to my commander, I said, please put me. Anyway, Har Herzl was usually where I would go anyway. He says, just because of it happened to be that I've been Modin, Har Herzl, those places been most, I've been other places. I've been to Dimona as well, but happened to be that Beit Har Herzl and Beit Shemesh and Modin and Beit Shemesh as well. So when they saw Beit Shemesh, immediately they placed me there. And then I realized it's Eli Moshe, which, as you said, your wife and my daughter were together in class. So I don't know if seeing it for you, I saw you for your wife. Seeing a familiar face was a bit of a, oh, wow, what are you doing here? I remember that.
Yeah. Wow. And this is obviously such a touchy position to be in, such a hard job to do. How do you guys find strength to continue to process all of these awful, awful scenes?
The first week, first 2 weeks, immediately they understood in Rabbanut that this is something different, and we are going to do different jobs and different roles. And one of the guys actually, you know, over the years, he became a psychologist, and he said immediately, "Hey, let me be the Chosen guy with the resilience to do some sessions to the guys." And we did this. It was really important, sit down and speak about it, and encouraging us to not to keep anything inside. And I can say for myself, I mean, I immediately understood that I cannot try to keep a straight face. It's not what I need to do. I cried in every funeral. I made for myself, I had to prepare when I knew, like, in a minute I have to, in the middle of an asped, and it's so emotional. So I knew by the tone of the people speaking, or maybe looking at the number of pages they still have in their hands, that in a minute I have to be back there and call up the next person. So to emotionally disconnect and go into the mode of doing my job. Wasn't easy, but I handled it. But I made a decision not to disconnect from. I really want to be connected and feel, and be part of every funeral. It wasn't easy, and I remember that first, there was a war going on every day, like every minute there were like new news, and we were like working. I didn't know what's going on. And the first Shabbat, after the first week, when I got home, I wanted a little bit to read about what happened. So I took the paper and I started to read, and I just couldn't. And I realized that my emotional capacity was like my emotional bandwidth was completely used. And I said, okay, fine. I don't need to know what's going on. This is my job. I'm going to focus on that, and that's it. And Baruch Hashem. Also, I think that being able to go every night, no matter how late it was, going back to my house, to my home, to my family, to my bed, to my shower, and even if it was like for a few hours, being in bed, thinking about everything that happened. So it was certainly a challenge, and I think that mostly the sort of camaraderie between all the chazanim. I mean, there was the way to the funeral. You take a car with the halal, and you pay the respects, and you don't speak about just anything, and you're with the halal. But the way back is the way that you can. And sometimes it was a long ride. I went to the funeral at Kadesh Barnea, or I don't know, somewhere up north. So that was the time to actually to the teammates that went with you, and to speak about things, and speak through things.
Unwind.
Yeah, unwind, and those are the best, because they know exactly what you're going through. And there were a lot of spontaneous singing together when we had like a few minutes, just as chazanim, of course. Music is a good outlet. But you could tell. I remember after a few weeks, we mentioned Marava, so we went actually to a Thursday night mishmer in Marava, where they, every week they sit down and sing with the Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Baruch Chait. So we went, a few guys who were connected to Marava, either alumni, or guys who had kids there. And you could tell the people, once the lights went down and the singing started, people cried their souls out. But Baruch Hashem, and as Avram said, we are not the story here. I mean, it's not that we're not important. I think it's just your challenge and your difficulties, they become nothing to compare to the families that you encounter. So you say, okay, fine. It's a little bit difficult, but it's and of course it's a holy mission. It's a lot of purpose and meaning, and that makes you go through it.
Important is, and as Danny said also, I was a. You get eventually. You don't want to get used to it. You don't want to be emotionless. You want to be feel connected. And the last Levias I performed, I was just as in the same. I can say like like a year and a half ago. But that's again a decision also too, because I don't want to be disconnected. I don't want my emotions to become numb, because numbness will bring to also, first of all, you can make mistakes because you're numb and you don't think the right way. I think emotion is very important when encountering families. But also for myself, I don't want to be numb to that. And yes, how do you cope? Especially talking about it. And I must say, since I've been in this unit and this capacity, and it's the first time that the army set up a proper chosen infrastructure. Didn't happen before. And we had weekly sessions that were mandatory, which is basically sitting in a group and discussing. And we discuss things, you talk about things. It's definitely, and we had twice also, like 3 days in a getaway that we were sitting with experts, and we just, you know, let it out, digest it, talk about it. And it's helped a lot of people. Definitely.
Wow. That's so interesting. To finish off, we know there's this very interesting connection between Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, and you guys already alluded to some of the beautiful sights that you've seen, some of the inspiring things. And I'm wondering if we could finish off with just some most inspiring moments for you guys, things that have given you confidence and optimism and hope for the future of this country, maybe specific moments that you guys found especially special, especially uplifting from your experiences.
So maybe I'll start. Few things. First of all, unity. As I said, and as Danny said, these people from all ways of life, they all gave their lives for this country, for this beautiful country, for this beautiful nation. And no one asked them, no one asked and said, I'm doing only for this and only for that. And when you see the people who sacrifice their life from all all the ways of life, and they come from, as I say, okay, I'm a bit of an older guy, this youth of the generation, the Gen Z or whatever they call them, they don't care. No, they care. They will sacrifice. They give their life. They're willing to fight for this country, just as 76 years ago, and not less. The youth today, the soldiers today, are just as dedicated to this country just as 76 years ago. There's definitely hope. And I must say also, many of the soldiers, true, not only, but a lot from the religious side of the spectrum. We're talking about holy people, not only because they sacrificed their life. There were people who were leading their life in Torah, in holiness, in Madrigas. Just to tell you, once we officiated a levaya of a fallen soldier that was half a year ago about, and they found in his pocket a little booklet where he wrote himself Kabbalot for the new year, to be mitchazek in this and to be mitchazek in that. I mean, you felt the holiness of the people. And that's something I definitely took with me.
For me, I definitely I agree with all what Avram says, and definitely it also made me change a little bit my mind about all kinds of things, all kinds of beliefs that I might had before. But I think the most amazing thing that amazed me sometimes was some bereaved families and their strength and the power of standing there and caring about the other and thinking about one family asked me to do the Misha Beracho L'Chayalei Tzahal because they were thinking about the soldiers that are still fighting. I mean, you just lost your son, your brother, your spouse, and you're thinking about others. And there was I remember one father who said to my friends, I want to tell you, please, I know I'm Av Shakul now, but please keep talking to me, keep laughing, keep saying things to me. Don't go on eggshells around me. I want everything, everyone to be comfortable with me. It was such a gadlut at this moment to think about, what would be my future with my surroundings and telling everyone, no, you should feel comfortable with me going forward. Those were things that it was just amazing to witness and to see how people and it was and it came back over and over, and you saw like widows talking and you saw children talking about their fathers. It was just amazing to see how strong people are. And maybe it is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not giving someone an nisayon unless he can deal with it. And it definitely saw that in my own eyes. And it is amazing. It gives a lot of hope. And as we said, it's just going back. It was such a difference between what's going on between the soldiers. And I think a lot of soldiers were talking about it. They were talking about like, hey, we before October 7th, the nation was divided and everyone was like against each other. And they came back after a few months and they said, we can't believe, I mean, what is going on here? It's completely different out there in the field. And you saw that also, even when they get to their last resting place, you could really tell to see the unity. It was very remarkable.
Just to
Wow.
add to that one thing, the
Please.
call to unity from families from all the spectrum, they're all called for unity. from not religious, from religious, from mitachlim, from all the families. They called for unity because our nation is yawning for unity, not the dirty politics we see day and night on the news. Then we saw the real people, and the real people are longing for unity.
Well, so you guys both mentioned how, you're not the story and you're sort of in the background, and I appreciate that. But I do personally want to salute both of you. Thank you guys for your holy work on behalf of Klal Yisrael and during this past year and a half. And thank you so much for sharing some of the experiences with our listeners on this special episode.
Thank you very much.
Now we move in to our final section, a collection of short stories and reflections on Inyane Dioma, Israel. We'll start with a story from Jeff Swartz, the former CEO of Timberland, about how he fell in love with Israel. This clip isn't from the Shtark Tank archives. It's actually from Michael Eisenberg's podcast, Invested.
So you moved to Israel 2 or 3 years ago now, at the height of the pandemic. And we talked about it when you were moving. But why did you move?
I came to Israel in 1974 when I was 14 years old with my parents, who were and are Zionists in the sense where that term used to be a term of pride, not a term of fear, and not a term of politics. Even it was an ideology of it was a big deal to them. I grew up in a house where mom lit candles on Friday night and dad opened this big black book to one page and sang a song, and he did take a sip of some very sweet wine that was kept in the refrigerator because nobody ever wanted it.
It wouldn't have gone bad anyway. Probably.
Exactly right. It was nuclear. That stuff could have. It's like
the Kiddush ceremony and Jewish Friday night dinner tables.
That wine is like spent nuclear reactors. The fuels that they'll never decompose. And then we would do whatever we did, and so it was at a Jewish household in that sense. It was, but mom dragging me to like Israel Independence Day marches when I was a little kid. That's the last time I've gone to any kind of a outside protest. I got to learn from that. But anyways, mom dragged me to that. And then in 1974, we came here. And so you and I have talked about this before. There's what do you know and how do you know? And I don't know what I knew, but I know how I knew that there was a question, a real one, which is, what does it mean to be at home? And at 14 years old, I didn't have the language for that, but in a place where I didn't speak a single word, where I couldn't read the alphabet, where I couldn't have not fit in less, I was home. And I knew that in 1974, and I've been coming home since then. And along the way, I'd made a deal with my dad. I'd work with him in business because he wanted to run Timberland. After he finished, we bought the other half of the business from his brother. They had been 50-50 partners. And dad wanted to run the business, and I was, son, I didn't care about business, but I care about my dad. So sure, yeah. How about 5 years? And then I go to Israel. And he said, sure, great. 30 years later,
There you came.
There you came.
Today, I actually tweeted, which you wouldn't have seen because you're not on social media.
Correct.
What are some experiences, things that we can't find words to describe? Mm-hmm. And I have an increasing feeling that with all the words people are saying out there, people are talking way too much in social media and saying things they don't think about. There's actually a growing number of experiences that we've lost words or can't find words for. I feel like I must have read this sometime by William Safire in his own language column in the New York Times, which as a kid I read pretty religiously. So you were the CEO of Timberland. It was a family business. You took over as CEO, did it for 15 years. It was started by your grandfather, Nathan Swartz, a shoemaker from the Ukraine. I guess he was never unemployed, being a shoemaker from the Ukraine until he had to immigrate to the United States, and then he was unemployed. Correct. Right. And so he founded what became this company that you sold ultimately for $2 billion. Take me through, like it's a family business. How was that decision to sell the company and why'd you sell it at the end of the day?
It's a great question. I used to drive home in the days where car phones were like, you take two hands to take the receiver off of the desk. Exactly right. And I used to call my Nana Ruth. That was Papa Nathan's widow. They came to my high school graduation in 1978.
At least we know you graduated.
Yeah, they came to celebrate that. This is the first one in the generations that they had like that. And on the way back to Florida, David, my brother and I drove them. My dad and my uncle bought them a new car, Buick something or other, and we drove it to New York. We stayed in Harlem at a Holiday Inn, and the next morning we drove to Crystal City to put them in the auto train. David and I got them to there. We had breakfast together, gave them a hug and a kiss, got on the plane and flew back to Boston. And my dad was waiting at the plane, which is unusual because Mom should have been at the plane. It's a work day. He had a suitcase. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, a little bit of an automobile accident. I'm sure everything's okay. So a drunk driver crossed over at 10 o'clock in the morning and wiped him out. And so my grandfather was in the hospital, and I said to Dad, "Look, I want to come." He said, No, he doesn't want you to come. He doesn't want you to see you like this. He's okay. He's going to be fine. And so for my graduation present at 18 years old, I was going to Israel to Tremp for the summer to hitchhike around the country. So I came, and I spoke to my grandfather. My father held the phone. He couldn't speak. He said, Dad says, "Yeah, he's got like a tube or two. It's no big deal." And my dad's with me, very straight. So I believed him. And he believed what he's telling me. And then I came here, a completely secular guy, hitchhiking around the country. When I came up to Jerusalem, I went, funny story on Friday night, blah, blah, blah. But on Sunday, we had made a deal that I call home every second Sunday. So I went to the post office in Jerusalem, and you place your order for the phone call, and it went straight through. And I thought, oh, it's like 5 o'clock in the morning. I had gotten there because I figured it takes 2 hours to get the call. It went straight through, and my mother answers on the second ring, and I was like, "Hi," and she said, "Dad needs to talk to you." And he said to me, "We've been trying to find you. We can't hold the funeral any longer. Your uncle says it's tomorrow morning." And I said, "Dad, it's like, it's noon here, and what am I supposed to do?" He said, "Do the best you can." So my stuff was in the hostel in the city and locked. So I sat down. I don't know if this is okay to say, but just you and me talking, right? I sat down on the seat, like on the sidewalk outside Shar Yafo, and I started to cry. And some Mishmar Gvul kid said to me,
Border police.
"Oh, sorry.
Okay.
The border police guy said to me, 'What's the matter?' And I said, 'My grandfather died.' And he said, 'Okay.' He got the hostel to open so I could get my passport. They put me in the Jeep. They drove me on the Route 1. This is 1978, right? It wasn't open. We drove out onto the tarmac. They held the El Al flight. This young guy took his gun off, handed it to the driver, and he came up the stairs with me onto the plane. And they had 2 seats for us, and we sat there together. And we flew to Boston, to New York. And only the land of Israel would take some nobody. They didn't know who I was, or didn't matter. It's like, this kid's got to get home for his grandfather's funeral. And so they did. They got me home. When I got to New York, I had to run to get the connection to go to Boston. And I said, "Will you tell me your name?" And he said, "No." And I said, "No, but I need to know your name." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because how can I write you like a note to say thank you?" And he said, "I don't need a note." And he turned away. And I'm not as powerful as you are, but okay connections, I can't find this guy. He doesn't want to be found.
In Jerusalem, they would say it was Elijah the prophet who turned up to come find you.
There's truth to that, my friend.
It's an astounding story. It's an astounding story.
The next story comes from Nobel laureate Professor Yisrael Aumann, back when we interviewed him on Shtark Tank around a half a year ago. He speaks about losing his son, Shlomo, over 40 years ago, and a remarkable Shiva visit he received from one of the world's most respected Rosh Yeshiva. Do I recall correctly hearing that you had a son in Shalavim who fell in battle?
Yeah, I don't like the word fell, okay? He was killed, all right? In America, we say killed in action, okay? He didn't fall because, and everybody in Israel says, nafal, nafal. Nafal indicates some kind of Shlomi Elliot, okay? He tripped and fell. It's a Shlomi El, okay? No, he did not fall. He was killed, okay? He was a gunner in a tank. He was manning the cannoneer in a tank, and he was hit by a Syrian shell, and he was killed on the spot, okay? That's right. And he had studied in Yeshivat Shalvim, and he was a beautiful young man, He had studied in Yeshivat Shalvim. And then he studied for a year in Yeshivat Mir in Yerushalayim. And then he studied for a year law in the Hebrew University. And at the end of that year, in June of 82, he was killed. He was called up to Miluim. He was not in Sadir. He was not in the regular army service. He was in reserve service. The reserves were called up, and he was killed on the fourth day of the war. That's correct, yes. And that is that's very tragic. He was a beautiful person, really, in many ways. But you asked me whether I was sorry that I made the decision to come to Israel. So not for a moment, not for a moment. Even on the day he was buried, I was not sorry that I had come to Israel. Yes, this is my life, and it's his life. And he was married, and he had a beautiful wife who's still with us, Baruch Hashem, and she remarried, and he had two beautiful children. He was the father of two children, and and those two children are Baruch Hashem still with us, and they have children, and they have grandchildren. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, I'm blessed with 39 great grandchildren up to now.
Wow.
And still going, still going strong. So that's about the size of it. Yeah.
Shalavim lost 3 soldiers who were killed in this past war, one of which was my brother-in-law. And at the Shiva, someone told me the remarkable story of Rav Gustman when he came to be Menachem Avel. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, sure, I will do that. Yes, he was when we came back from the Beis Holman. He was really waiting in front of the gate to our house. Okay, he was waiting there for us to come back. So I went upstairs, and I washed my face, and I sat down. And he came, and he sat down opposite me, and he waited for 30 seconds. And I sat there in silence, yes, because I was trying to get my wits together. What should I say? You know, the oval is supposed to start the conversation. The oval is supposed to start the conversation so that the visitor, the Menachem oval, knows in which direction he wants to go. Yeah. So yeah, according to custom, I wanted to start, but I was thinking for 30 seconds what to say, okay? And then he didn't wait for me. He contravened the custom, and he started talking. And he talked about the times in the ghetto of Vilna during the Shoah, during the time of the Germans. And he talked about this. He talked in Yiddish, okay? I understand Yiddish because you can't grow up in New York without understanding Yiddish. I didn't learn Yiddish in Frankfurt, but in Frankfurt, in fact, when I came to the United States from Frankfurt, and the Rav of the shul spoke, he spoke on Shabbos before Musaf or whatever it is, yes? And he spoke in Yiddish. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand a word of it, yes. But in the meantime, that's when we first came in 1938. In the meantime, you can't grow up in New York without understanding Yiddish. So I learned Yiddish. And he spoke in Yiddish about the time in Vilna in the early 40s. And he said it was very, he said the Nazis brought the Roshoim, he said the Roshoim brought a truck, and they loaded children on the truck. Now, not standing up or sitting down, but lying horizontally, okay? Lying on the truck horizontally in layers, 7 or 8 layers of horizontal layers of children. And they drove the truck away and they killed the children, okay? And he said on one of those trucks was my son, Meir. Meir was my son. He was 5 years old. And they took him away to his death. And now my Meir and your Shlomo are in the Olam HaEmes, okay? And they're talking to each other, okay? They're talking to each other. And my Meir is envious of your Shlomo. Why is he envious? Why is he envious of Shlomo? So he gave 3 answers. And one is that there was nothing he could do. Yes, there was nothing Meir could do. And Shlomo defended himself and defended his nation. And he went down fighting, okay? He went down fighting. And Shlomo was able to defend himself. He went down fighting, and he lived a beautiful life. And my Meir did not live. He lived a miserable life, okay? So my Meir is envious of your Shlomo. That's the story of Rav Guzman.
Michael Eisenberg is one of Israel's leading venture capitalists. When we interviewed him last year for Shtark Tank, he opened up about the struggles of Aliyah and what he recommends to those considering making Aliyah today. Have a listen.
I set up an organization called Nevo, which is a professional network for Olim and high tech here, because it's hard when you're an immigrant. It was hard for me when I came. You didn't have a network. You didn't know anyone. I know to call. I turned up oftentimes at the early high tech things in the mid 90s. I was the only yarmulke there. And it was hard. And it's hard, by the way, when you're an immigrant to any country, it's hard. And I think people remember, some people, my grandparents are American, but for the most part, but many people had grandparents who came or great grandparents who came and they had an accent till the day they died. Didn't speak proper English when they were in America. And you're an immigrant, you didn't know the system. Wherever you grow up, the system. I still walk around Manhattan, it feels like home. Like I know Manhattan like the back of my hand. I know the system. I'm living here 30 years, and I still don't understand the system. By the way, I can't read my bank statement, and my Hebrew's fluent. I've written Sfarim in Hebrew. And it's just, that part of it's hard. The same thing is true professionally. It's a challenge, but it's important. And it's important, and I think it's not only important, I think it's possible, and it's more possible today than it was 30 years ago. And so I encourage people to do it. I think this is where our future is. And people ask me why I'm in high tech and why I'm in Israel, because I want to live in the future. I want to be where the future of the Jewish people is. I want to be where the future of the economy is. And that's high tech, and that's, Israel. And I encourage people to do it. You can do it,
Yeah, I highly recommend everyone to follow some of your writings and podcasts about Aliyah and the society. I think it's super important. And I think just the professional aspect is something that people have this fear of. But as you said, once they understand that it's a totally different ballgame, there's so many opportunities. And when the Chassam Sofer writes that anytime you're working to develop the economy in Israel, you're Mekayim Mitzvos Yishuv Haaretz, as Rav Amital said. So it's completely different than the way people may perceive it to be.
30-something years ago, I was with Rav Lichtenstein in the room, and I can't remember exactly what the question that was asked. And the way I remember it might insult some people, so I won't say it. But the way he answered it was, says in America, if you work for General Electric, so you work for General Electric. In Israel, if you work for Tadiran, so you work for Klal Yisrael. I think that's very, very, very true. It's a paraphrase of the famous Chassam Sofer. It's 100% true. And these are values decisions as much as they're economic decisions. I mean, I started my career in political consulting and I was fired. And they didn't tell me I was fired. And the way it worked then was they paid me in arrears, and I actually laid out the money for the company in Israel and got paid. And they didn't pay me for that either. So I was in debt. And we had one kid, and we, Baruch Hashem, had a bunch of kids, as you know, and life was hectic. And I was turned down from tens of jobs, tens, for a variety of reasons. I hadn't done the army, other reasons. But we had decided we were moving to Israel and we were staying here. And, it wasn't a trivial period. My wife's family with some health issues too. It was not a trivial period, to say the least. And we moved here at the beginning without family. And I think one of the things that I took away from family members, parents, grandparents, Rav Amital for sure, was perseverance. Like I said, we had a lot of kids. It was, my wife and I look at each other now and say, did we ever sleep? Did we have a moment of rest? And there were trade-offs. There were days that I couldn't go to Tel Aviv because I had to pick the kids up. Yafa was pregnant with somebody and was tired, and she was getting her master's in Tanakh. And, I had to pick up the kids. And so sometimes I left Tel Aviv at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the first time. There was another period in time where I was working in Herzliya when I joined Benchmark. I left the house every day at 5:30 in the morning to go to Minyan in Herzliya, and I learned Daf Yomi then afterwards, and then went to the office and came home earlier because I couldn't sit in that traffic. It was a disaster. It was driving me crazy. And Yafa pitched in there. And so, the way I think about it is I was very fortunate to marry an incredible woman. I often say that the second best decision of my life was moving to Israel. The first one was marrying Yafa. It wasn't always straightforward. And one thing I'll share was I had a real temptation in 1997, I think it was. I got an offer to move to America, back to America, for a lot of money. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and I tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. We already weren't sleeping that much. And at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock one morning, I think Yafa was nursing or something like that. And I woke up, I said, we didn't come to Israel for money. We're not going to leave. And that was also an important moment for me, which was, it was really important to make it work in Israel for our kids and our grandkids and the future of Klal Yisrael. And I deeply believe in that. Deeply, deeply, deeply believe in that. I believe in the future of our people. I believe that Hashem has given us an opportunity that our grandparents weren't blessed with, our great-grandparents, that Rashi wasn't blessed with, that, my great-grandparents would have given an arm and a leg for. And it's on us. And it's on us, and it's our responsibility not to mess it up and to take responsibility.
Thanks so much for sticking with us through this special, longer episode. It means a lot to have you as part of the Shtark Tank community. We all know that Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut are deeply connected, but I didn't realize just how personal that connection was until I started this podcast and interviewed my own father. There, I found out that the loss of a relative in battle played a crucial role in my own Aliyah story. Here it is.
The other circumstance was in 2006, a year after our family was on vacation in Israel in 2005, where we were having a vacation while the Gaza Strip was being handed over to somebody else to control. A year later, we were on another summer vacation in Cape Cod. Sounds like we took a lot of vacations. You probably don't remember it that way. And while we were on vacation in 2006, the second Lebanon war was going on, and one of our family members fell. And that's when my wife and I looked at each other and said, it's time to get off the sidelines of Jewish history and get onto the playing field. And as hard as it was and challenging as it was to imagine continuing our careers at that point and rebuilding in Israel, it was something which, like you say, the world around us has to resonate with us. We have to hear the knocking on that door, and we have to be always listening to the beat of our own heart. And as a result, taking the next step in the direction we think is the right one, and hoping that we have the siyata d'shmaya to go along with it in a way that comes out right for all of us, for our families, and for our own personal well-being.